Welcome back. In my series on the three-act structure, I gave several alternatives to the structure, one of which was the Kishotenketsu, or Japanese four-act structure. In this video, I'm excited to delve into this structure because of how unique it is compared to Western media. Let's get into it. Most of the plotting alternatives I mentioned in the original article lead to essentially the same place. It doesn't matter whether you use the 15 beats or save the cat method, the 7-point method, the story circle, or something else. You usually end up with something that resembles the three-act structure of Western media anyway. But Kishotenketsu is different. It starts much the same as other plotting structures I've mentioned, but owing to its Japanese roots, it ends in a very unique way. I'm eager to learn more about it myself, and I can already see uses for it in projects down the road. A Tale of Two Cultures. Much of Western media is based on European principles of philosophy and literature. Our mythical traditions are based on the works of early authors like Aristotle and Homer. Their literary philosophies were based on principles of Stoicism and Romanticism, which were pervasive in Europe. Stoicism is the view that life is suffering and it should be endured without quarrel or complaint. Romanticism is a worldview that stresses the importance of the supremacy of the individual. It has nothing to do with the slick-haired Casanova romancing his way through the Italian countryside. It has more to do with the notion that a man has the right to shape the world according to his will and defend what he's built against all odds. Taken together, these principles in literature form a protagonist who endures hardship readily, conquers it, shapes the world in his image, and returns the conquering hero. This is the classical and sometimes cliched story of the hero who storms the castle, slays the dragon, and gets the girl. This is the foundation upon which most Western media is based, to varying degrees. If you want an example of a good Stoic romanticist, I would recommend the work of Ayn Rand, especially her seminal work, Atlas Shrugged. But Japan is different. Japan has traditionally had what's known as an honor-shame culture. Honor-shame cultures don't tend to celebrate the heroes in their midst. Instead, they downplay the individual and his accomplishments. The focus is on harmony and not bringing shame to your family and community. You don't do what you do because it's right, or even because it works. You do it because it's what the community's doing, and you don't want to bring shame by going against the grain. Western styles of discourse can seem arrogant to a Japanese or generally Asian mindset. Here in the West, we have a saying, "The squeaky wheel gets the grease," meaning the individual who stands out and makes himself known gets the best results. But Eastern cultures pioneered a very different saying, "The protruding nail gets hammered down," and you can guess what that means. So they don't see the world as a prize to be conquered as we do in the West. Instead of being something that you bend to your will, the world is something that bends you to its will. You don't have a choice, and fighting against it will only bring shame to your community. This tends to stifle not only individual liberties, but social and technological progress as well. Both need individuals to stand out and buck norms to make progress. This is what we call determinism. When properly understood, it's the central underpinning of the Kishotenketsu method. Determinism is the view that all events, including human actions, are determined by external forces. As such, characters in a Kishotenketsu story don't usually go out and affect their world. Rather, they're affected by their world through the story. There are 4 stages or acts in a Kishotenketsu story. The first 2 are almost identical to the first 2 acts in Western media, so I'll only give them a cursory glance here. You can see my other videos to learn more about the 3-act structure and some of its alternatives. Key, the introduction. It's like the first act of a Western 3-act story circle structure. In this act, we see the hero and experience his ordinary world. Show, the development. The second act is like its Western media counterpart, but with a few differences. We have the rising action of the story, but don't experience the inciting incident yet. That comes closer to the end of the act or early in the third act. Instead, we use the time for more character development and world building. Then we reach the midpoint as in Western media, but this is where things get interesting. 10. The twist. In Western media, the midpoint of the second act culminates with the meeting with the goddess. It's a place of comfort where revelations are made and the character chooses to continue with the journey. But in Kishotenketsu, this is where the story really begins. This is where we get a twist in the story, and it isn't a small twist either. It's like driving 100 miles per hour down the highway in the dark with no headlights and pulling the wheel hard left without hitting the brake. It's the kind of twist that completely reframes the story and everything that's happened up to this point. We could almost think of this as a meeting with the goddess moment. Certain revelations are also made, but it's rarely a place of comfort. The characters often find themselves scrambling for survival afterward. Instead of a meeting with the goddess, perhaps we should call it a meeting with the devil. Ketsu, the conclusion. After an earth-shattering revelation, this is where our characters come to terms with what they've learned. They need to reconcile what they've learned in the first two acts with deep, shocking revelations they received in the third. Remember, this isn't Western media. The heroes don't typically win the day here. They can, but it's not typical in a traditional Kishotenketsu. Instead, they only come to terms with what has happened to them. They aren't driving the story is driving them. They've gone from a place of control and comfort to a place where everything is in chaos. Their only purpose now is to make sense of it. In Western media, this is where everything would be wrapped up in a neat little bow. Leaving the audience without breaking tension first is verboten in Western literature. The obvious exception would be if you want to build tension for an upcoming sequel. But in a Kishotenketsu, it isn't uncommon to leave loose ends, and characters are often left in a state of tension at the end of the story. That's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to take a closer look at some of the unique aspects of the form and some of the things you should know before you try to dabble in it. Good writing, and Calamus Gladio Fortior.